I'm Jonathan Broadbent, creator and founder of Unwoke Academy. This is another Market Minute. Today we're going to focus on 401k plans and things like them. There's some detail that happens behind the scenes that I think you should know about. And in order to illustrate a few points and get, hopefully, more Americans pointed in the right direction, I'm going to use a little bit of history. Prior to July of 2012, and remember that date, it's kind of an important one, there were no actual requirements that clear disclosure be made about the fees that were collected out of the 401k plan. I'm going to pause right there for a brief moment and highlight again, for the record, there is no requirement that the employees, that means you, if you're participating in your workplace 401k plan, there's no requirement that you be the ones that carry the cost. It can be, and it's actually not common, but you can find examples of companies that make the choice to actually pay for the services themselves directly. And that means things like the plan advisor, the tax or legal or accounting services, the company that offers what's called record keeping. So there are some different players that are involved in delivering that 401k plan to you. And understandably, there's some fees associated. Just know that there is a question that should take place more often than it actually does about who pays that bill. Some companies, and hopefully I do think personally it's a growing trend for more companies to decide to pay that directly rather than kind of subtracting on a consistent and ongoing basis from your account. Prior to July of 2012, it was actually very difficult to figure out who was getting paid from what sources and how much they were getting paid. So in the lead up to July of 2012, there were a lot of us who work in that area of the marketplace and that area of finance who were really excited about the prospect of forcing disclosure. It's called fee disclosure, and couldn't wait to finally have easy, we were hoping, fee disclosure so we could go and help companies that offer 401k plans to know what's called fee reasonableness. What are you paying? And is it reasonable for whatever it is you're getting in return for those payments? Here's another pause because it's kind of an important one and one that you should know. The first thing I'm going to say is that I am an absolute firm believer in the value of 401k plans. Really, there's little that can compete out there in the world of investing that helps retirement savers do a better job over the long haul to save, hopefully, comfortably and successfully for a good, comfortable retirement. So 401k plans themselves are not a problem, I don't believe. The fees and the services that you get in exchange for those can be a problem. And that's where there's this kind of tug of war that takes place behind the scenes. You may not see it and you may be unaware of it, but companies out there, and I don't mean to disparage broadly a giant, huge section of the world of finance and banking and insurance, but I sort of am. Those companies out there, they would be delighted to have the highest fees possible with the smallest amount of service connected to that, the lowest service level at the highest fee, in other words. And if they're doing their jobs well, your HR and benefits director and the people that work on behalf of you and your colleagues want the exact opposite. They want the fees as low as possible and the services as good as possible. It helps everybody except for the bank or Wall Street firm or insurance company or whoever is connected to it. They don't like the transparency and they don't like their feet held to the fire, proverbially, for good service. There are big firms out there that have huge money to be able to put into trying to capture those really large plans. And they can do all kinds of things from private jet flight to an exotic city under the auspices of due diligence and meals out with steak dinners and luxury hotel and those kinds of things. Unfortunately, that happens, and there were all sorts of other nefarious things that happened going back prior to July of 2012. It was kind of this murky world. You had banks, for instance, this is one unfortunate example. Banks were offering lower interest lines of credit to businesses if they moved their 401k plan to the bank, and the bank would manage it, but then they would kind of jack up the fees inside the 401k. So really, the company ended up with a line of credit, a business line of credit that had maybe an arguably a little lower interest rate, but the employees had higher fees in the 401k plan. So the bank on the balance was ending up typically to the good. They were making more money off of the 401k as a plan advisor. I'm sort of air quoting that then they were losing by subtracting and taking a little bit off of the line of credit. But that's just one example. There are lots and lots of examples out there. There are all kinds of things that happen in that world because we're talking about huge pools of money often. In total, there's about $46 trillion in U.S. retirement savings. Around $13 trillion of that is in 401k plans. For a while ago, for a podcast, I did some back-of-the-napkin sketching of what those numbers might look like. And based on a fee of 0.75%, that would be a $97.5 billion a year profit-making machine for banks, insurance companies, etc. You start to get a sense for the scope of numbers that we're talking about here. In the lead up to July of 2012, there were a lot of financial firms and banks and insurance companies and brokers that didn't like the idea of fee disclosure. Well, many of us were pushing very hard for that and loved the fact that it was going to be rolled out in July of 2012. Good intentions sometimes go in bad directions. I am going to pause to say that I was very involved in the conversation at a national level. However, I was not involved professionally with the Bureau of Labor and Statistics or Department of Labor or any of the legislators that were involved in that piece of legislation that pushed through and got adopted, forcing fee disclosure. But I do believe that because of where I was at the time, I had a recognized voice and probably had an impact in that. And I actually know specifically 6 years prior in 2006, I was very involved in kind of a national level in manually doing those fee disclosures. And back then, we used spreadsheets. We actually manually brought in data and created fee disclosure manually for companies. And that was pretty successful. But you can get a sense for what we were anticipating in July of 2012. Well, bring in the big heavy hitters, and a lot of people went to work as lobbyists and fought very hard. There is one group in particular that was successful. Insurance companies were successful in creating a carve-out for themselves from 401k fee disclosure, and specifically insurance products known under the acronym GIC and GAC, which stands for Guaranteed Investment Contract and Guaranteed Annuity Contract. Those are exempted. So those insurance companies, and sometimes the insurance companies may fill multiple roles, like offering the 401k plan, but then also having products that they sell into the 401k plan. And they may have various different means of capturing revenue and being profitable from the relationship. So it becomes a difficult task for people like me and my firm and my role to discern who's getting paid how much for what services, and is it reasonable? Because that, in summary, is really my job. That's my role. That's the company that I formed. That's what we were supposed to do. So when you have a company that may serve multiple different roles, some of those insurance companies also own mutual fund companies, and maybe they're different names. So that insurance company may offer you the 401k plan. They may offer insurance products inside the 401k plan, and they also may have mutual funds that are part of that menu that you might sign up for. My job since 2002 has been to try to figure out all those dynamics and those relationships and lend transparency and create fee disclosure for companies like your employer. That's my job, and that's why I formed the company that I did when I left Wall Street. Here is an unforeseen consequence of the result of forced fee disclosure starting in July of 2012. A lot of plan brokers have plan fees that they collect. And again, I don't want to be overly harsh, but you should know that anything that's subtracted out of your account is money that can't grow for your retirement. In a few recent podcasts, I've done comparatives just using like a basic $10,000 amount in your 401k plan. What's the difference? If 75 basis points, or 0.75%, in other words, is subtracted from your growth. And so I've just done a whole bunch of examples of that, and however you shape it, you end up with a lot less money because there's money taken out of your account that doesn't grow and compound over time. That is, by the way, an argument for more people to consider switching to that fee-based relationship. And again, it is perfectly legitimate for companies to negotiate directly with the providers for their 401k plan. And that includes a plan advisor if you have one. The company can go directly to them and negotiate that fee. As an added possible advantage to that relationship structure, companies will most likely gain a tax write-off for that, just like working with an accountant or lawyer or other type of professional service provider. They should be able to get a tax write-off, I would think. And they can get really aggressive and get, hopefully, a really good rate. And that means for everybody that's participating and all their beneficiaries, more money in their account. All else being equal, it's a given. It's the only thing that you can control inside of 401k plans is the fees. You can't control growth unless you're in some sort of fixed growth sort of product. But it's a great way to go to make sure that more people at the company end up with more money saved for their retirement. To put that in a broad context and thinking for a moment about all the unfunded liability that exists all throughout the United States. Unfunded liability, if you're not familiar with the term, I'm sorry to throw so much out at you at once, but unfunded liability means the difference between what's been promised for a comfortable retirement and what's available to pay for it. So if we can subtract fees, we put American workers in a much better position to retire comfortably. That's a given. So imagining for a moment those plan brokers out there who get whatever it is, 1% or 0.5% or whatever their fee is that comes out of the plan. And for most people, it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. They don't want to give up on that because, let's face it, that can be a comfortable lifestyle if you land a whole bunch of 401k plans. And let's say that all of them are paying you $100,000 a piece. By the way, hint, hint, if there's $100,000 coming out of yours and your colleagues' accounts every year to pay a plan broker, you have to first ask the question, is what you're getting in return reasonable, and is there something better that might be available to you? Everyone should be asking that question. That's actually why you get those fee disclosure statements in the mail. I really truly wish more people paid attention to that and used it as a talking point, as a starting point to go into the benefits office and ask questions about what you're getting and how much you're paying. Those brokers out there who had gotten comfortable with whatever they were getting off of however many 401k plans they'd sold, they didn't want to give up that money. But they knew that starting in July of 2012, there would be a fee disclosure and the total fees that the plan paid would be under the microscope. In order to justify the total fees that were paid by the 401k plan, that means all the different providers and individuals that get to subtract money out of your account. Unfortunately, a lot of plan advisors defaulted into Vanguard funds. Vanguard funds are among the cheapest ways to invest out there, and they have been for a long time. If you want to know more about why they're as cheap as they are, I've covered that in some prior episodes, but just know that whatever the total fees were, and let's say prior to July of 2012, maybe you had a plan that had 2.5% or 3% in fees, that's a significant headwind. In order to try to continue to justify whatever the fees that the plan broker was making, they needed to subtract cost somewhere else. And defaulting into Vanguard for a while made all the sense in the world. Unfortunately, now that we're able to lift the hood and expose Vanguard for leaning heavily left and voting heavily left with their proxy votes, that's the fallout that we unfortunately are suffering. So instead of plan brokers or plan advisors doing the thing that we'd all hoped that they would do, which is be to negotiate all different fees and services, reevaluate and reassess, and make sure that everything was reasonable to the plan, what ended up happening, unfortunately, is most of those plan brokers ended up staying where they were and cutting other costs, which sort of dumped trillions of dollars into Vanguard and a few companies like them. That's not healthy, and it's not what should have happened. I believe personally, professionally, that is a breach of fiduciary duty. Rather than going out there and finding good investments, they were motivated from a cost-covering standpoint to just simply move to the cheapest available. Now it's up to us to reverse that trend and get back into actual due diligence and looking for good investment alternatives for you and your portion of that $46 trillion in savings. I'm Jonathan Broadbent. This has been another Market Minute from Unwoke Academy.